What happens when America's most beloved movie star suddenly decides she's had enough? Right there, under the blinding studio lights, with millions watching live and a host known for his razor-sharp wit pushing one question too far. Before we dive in, pause for just a second. Subscribe to The Truth Narrator, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, because stories like this don't just unfold, they explode. The applause was still rolling as Julia Roberts walked onto the stage, that familiar smile floating effortlessly across her face, the kind of smile that had sold romance, hope, and vulnerability to audiences for over 3 decades. The band played her theme with playful warmth, and Stephen Colbert stood, clapping just a beat longer than necessary, his eyebrows raised in mock awe. The crowd loved it. They always did. To them, this was comfort television. Familiar faces. Safe laughter. No one sensed the shift in the air yet. The subtle tightening, like a storm pulling breath from the room before the first crack of thunder. Julia waved, hugged Stephen, and settled into the chair, crossing her legs with casual grace. The cameras zoomed in, catching the sparkle of her earrings, the slight tension at the corner of her eyes that makeup couldn't fully erase. She laughed at the opening joke, a self-deprecating line Stephen tossed her way about rom-coms and forever smiles. The audience laughed too. It was easy. It was rehearsed. But beneath that laughter, something else flickered, an alertness in Julia's gaze, a sense that she was measuring every word. Stephen leaned forward, cards in hand, pretending to shuffle them though he already knew what he wanted to ask. "It's great to have you back," he said, voice warm, almost disarming. "You've been selective lately. Very selective. Fans keep wondering, are we seeing the beginning of the end, or just a strategic pause?" A harmless question. On paper. Julia tilted her head, smiled again, and answered smoothly, talking about balance, about family, about choosing stories that mattered. Applause followed. Stephen nodded, but didn't move on. That was the first sign. "You know," he continued, tone shifting just slightly, "some people say that when actors start talking about balance, it's code for being tired of Hollywood itself." A ripple moved through the crowd. Julia's smile held, but it stiffened, like glass cooling too quickly. "People say a lot of things," she replied lightly. Laughter bubbled up, uncertain but loyal. Stephen chuckled, sensing momentum. "They do. And some of those people also say Hollywood hasn't always been kind to women who speak their minds." The band didn't play. The audience didn't laugh. Julia's eyes locked onto Stephen's, and for a brief second, the studio felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls had leaned in to listen. "I'm not sure where you're going with this," she said, still calm, but the softness was gone. Stephen raised his hands theatrically. "Hey, I'm just asking what everyone's thinking." That phrase, "what everyone's thinking," hung in the air like a challenge. Julia shifted in her seat. The camera caught it. A producer offstage glanced up from the monitor. The audience sensed it now, that uncomfortable electricity that turns live television into a tightrope. "What everyone's thinking," Julia repeated slowly, tasting the words. "Or what you're thinking." A few gasps. A nervous laugh from the back row. Stephen smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes this time. "Fair question," he said. "I'm thinking you've been very quiet on certain issues. Especially lately." There it was. The line had been crossed, even if no one could say exactly where. Julia inhaled a deep, measured breath. Her hands clasped together, knuckles whitening just enough for the camera to notice. "I didn't come here to be interrogated," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. That made it worse. Silence spread, thick and heavy, swallowing the studio whole. Stephen shifted in his chair, trying to recover with humor. "Interrogated is a strong word." "No," Julia interrupted, and the interruption landed like a slap. The audience reacted instinctively, a sharp intake of breath, scattered applause that didn't know where to go. "What's strong," she continued, "is assuming silence equals guilt or fear or weakness." Stephen opened his mouth, then closed it again. The band stayed frozen. Somewhere backstage, a stage manager whispered urgently into a headset. Julia leaned forward now, eyes shining not with tears, but with something fiercer. "You invite me here to celebrate my work, my life, my choices. And then you corner me with assumptions wrapped up as curiosity." Stephen tried to smile it off. "That's not my intention. But it is the impact," she shot back, the word impact landing with unmistakable weight. The audience murmured, caught between shock and admiration. Phones buzzed in pockets. Clips were already being imagined, already being born. For a moment, it seemed like Stephen might push back, might defend the question, the format, the right of a host to prod. Instead, he hesitated. And that hesitation, caught live, magnified, was everything. Julia sat back, crossing her arms now, not defensive but resolute. "I've spent my entire career answering questions that men are never asked," she said. "Tonight, I'm done playing along." The applause this time was louder, rawer, uncontrollable. Stephen nodded slowly, absorbing the moment, but the balance had shifted. This was no longer his stage alone. The cameras kept rolling. They always do. And as the tension crackled and the audience leaned forward, one truth became undeniable. This interview was no longer entertainment. It was a confrontation. And it was only just beginning. The applause didn't fade so much as fracture, breaking into uneven waves that washed over the stage and left behind an eerie quiet. Julia Roberts sat perfectly still, her arms still crossed, her jaw set with a calm that felt hard-earned rather than rehearsed. Stephen Colbert cleared his throat, the sound picked up by the microphone and amplified far more than he intended. In live television, even a breath can sound like panic. "Well," he said finally, forcing a chuckle that landed flat, "this just got very real very fast." A few people laughed, out of habit more than humor. Julia didn't join them. She looked out at the audience instead, scanning faces. Young, old, familiar, unfamiliar. All waiting to see what she would do next. For years, she had played characters who ran toward love, toward chaos, toward redemption. Tonight, she wasn't playing anyone. Stephen shuffled his cards again, a nervous tick now. "I respect that," he added quickly. "Truly. But you know how this works. People look to public figures." "No," Julia cut in, her voice sharper now, edged with fatigue. "You know how this works. You ask a question. I decide whether or not I answer it. That's the deal. Anything beyond that becomes pressure, not conversation." The word pressure echoed. Someone in the front row nodded instinctively. Another whispered something to their companion. The tension wasn't explosive. It was suffocating, the kind that pressed against the chest and made it hard to breathe. Stephen leaned back, trying to regain footing. "I think people just want honesty," he said. "And sometimes honesty is uncomfortable." Julia let out a short, humorless laugh. "Honesty isn't uncomfortable," she replied. "Disrespect is. And pretending it's honesty doesn't change that." A murmur rippled through the crowd, louder this time. The band leader glanced toward the control room, hands hovering uncertainly above his instrument. This wasn't in the rundown. This wasn't something you could cue music for. Stephen's smile faded completely. For the first time since the interview began, he dropped the host persona. "So what do you want me to do?" he asked quietly. "Ignore what's happening in the world?" Julia turned back to him, eyes narrowing slightly. "I want you to stop assuming that if I don't perform my beliefs on command, they don't exist." That hit harder than anything she'd said so far. The audience reacted instantly, applause, gasps, a few scattered cheers that felt less like fandom and more like relief. Someone finally said it. Out loud. On live TV. Stephen nodded slowly, but his pride was bruised now, and it showed. "You realize," he said, "that silence from powerful voices can be interpreted as complicity." Julia leaned forward again, uncrossing her arms. Her voice dropped, forcing the room to lean in with her. "And you realize," she replied, "that demanding emotional labor from women, especially public ones, has been a tool of control for a very long time." The studio went dead silent. No laughter. No applause. Just the low hum of cameras and air conditioning. Somewhere backstage, a producer mouthed, "Oh my God." Stephen opened his mouth, then closed it. He blinked, processing, recalibrating. This wasn't the sparring he was used to. This wasn't a politician dodging a question or a celebrity playing coy. This was a line being drawn, clear and unapologetic. "I didn't mean it that way," he said finally, softer now. "I know," Julia replied. "That's the problem." That single sentence shifted the energy completely. It wasn't an attack. It was an indictment of something bigger, something systemic. The audience felt it, even if they couldn't articulate it yet. This wasn't about Stephen Colbert. And it wasn't just about Julia Roberts. It was about every interview where a smile was expected as payment for intrusion. Stephen glanced toward the audience, then back at Julia. "So where does that leave us?" he asked. Julia considered him for a moment. The anger hadn't vanished, but it had cooled, settling into something steadier. "It leaves us here," she said. "Two people talking. Not a host extracting, not a guest performing. Just talking. A beat passed. Then another. Finally, Stephen nodded. Okay, he said. Then let me ask you this. What do you wish people understood about you that they never ask? The shift was subtle but real. The audience sensed it and leaned forward collectively. Julia exhaled, the tension easing just slightly from her shoulders. I wish they understood, she said slowly, that privacy isn't secrecy. It's survival. The words hung there, fragile and heavy. Stephen listened now, truly listened, and for a moment it seemed like the storm had passed. But live television has a way of reigniting embers when you least expect it. And yet, Stephen added, almost reflexively, you've chosen a very public life. Julia's eyes flashed. The room stiffened again. I chose a profession, she corrected, not ownership. The audience erupted, this time without hesitation. Applause thundered through the studio, loud enough to drown out the band even if they had tried to play. Stephen raised his hands, half surrender, half acknowledgement, but the moment was no longer his to steer. Julia stood slightly in her seat, not to leave, but to punctuate her presence. There's a difference, she said, voice ringing clear, between sharing art and surrendering autonomy. Tonight, that line got blurred, and I'm unblurring it. Stephen stood too now, an instinctive move, as if standing might rebalance the scales. I hear you, he said, and this time it sounded genuine. But the damage or the revelation had already been done. Somewhere, a social media intern was frantically clipping footage. Somewhere else, a headline was being drafted in real time. The audience knew it. Julia knew it. Stephen knew it. This wasn't going to end when the cameras cut. And as the show pushed forward, trying desperately to return to safer ground, one truth loomed over everything that followed. Something irreversible had happened in those few unscripted minutes. A boundary had been drawn on live television, and the world was about to decide which side of it they stood on. The show limped forward, but the rhythm was gone. Every joke Stephen tried to land afterward felt like a glass ornament dropped onto concrete, technically intact but stripped of its shine. The audience laughed when cued, applauded when the lights blinked, yet their eyes kept drifting back to Julia Roberts, as if she were the gravitational center of the room now. She sat composed, hands folded in her lap, expression unreadable, but the energy around her vibrated like a live wire. Stephen attempted a pivot, mentioning her latest film, praising her performance with practiced enthusiasm. It's being called one of your most restrained roles, he said, searching for safe ground. Very subtle. Very controlled, Julia finished for him, not unkindly. Yes. The word landed with intent. Controlled. The audience caught it. Stephen paused, then nodded. Exactly, he said. Controlled. But even as he spoke, the earlier exchange loomed between them like an unspoken third presence. Every sentence had to navigate around it. Every question felt loaded, every pause suspicious. Was that restraint a conscious choice? Stephen asked. Julia tilted her head, considering. It was necessary, she replied. There are moments when holding back tells the truth better than spilling everything. A few people clapped softly. Stephen smiled, but there was tension in his jaw. He was listening, but also calculating. How to regain momentum without reigniting the fire. And do you ever worry, he asked carefully, that people might misread that restraint? Julia looked at him, really looked at him, and something softened just a fraction. All the time, she said. But I've learned that being misunderstood is less painful than being overexposed. The audience reacted with a low murmur of approval. Somewhere in the back, someone whispered, Wow. The cameras zoomed in, catching the glimmer in Julia's eyes. Not tears, but something close to them. Resolve, maybe. Or release. Stephen nodded slowly. That's incredibly honest, he said. Julia smiled, but it was smaller now, more guarded. Honesty doesn't always feel generous in the moment, she replied. But it's kinder in the long run. For a brief stretch, it almost worked. The conversation steadied. They spoke about craft, about aging in Hollywood, about the strange disorientation of watching your younger self on screen decades later. The audience relaxed, laughter returning in cautious bursts. The producers exhaled. Then Stephen glanced at the clock. We've got just a few minutes left, he said, and that simple statement tightened the room again. Final questions are dangerous. They carry weight. They invite summation. So let me ask you one last thing, he continued. What would you say to fans who feel disappointed when their heroes don't speak up the way they hope? The audience stilled. Julia's smile vanished entirely this time. She looked down for a moment, as if deciding whether to answer at all. The silence stretched, long enough to make people shift in their seats. I would say, she began slowly, that disappointment is real. And it's valid. But it's also not ownership. Stephen held his breath. Julia looked back up, eyes steady, voice gaining strength. You don't get to script someone else's courage, she said. You don't get to decide how loud it has to be, or when it's enough. A beat. Then applause, strong, unified, undeniable. This wasn't polite clapping. This was resonance. The kind that rattles in your chest. Stephen nodded, accepting it. Fair, he said quietly. Julia continued, now unstoppable. We all show up in different ways. Some people march. Some people donate. Some people listen. Some people protect their families and survive. None of that is nothing. The audience rose slightly in their seats, as if pulled forward by the force of her words. Phones were definitely out now. Even the cameraman seemed transfixed. Stephen tried to interject, but Julia wasn't finished. And when you put someone on the spot, she added, and demand proof of their values in 30 seconds or less, you're not seeking justice. You're seeking performance. The word performance echoed again, tying the night together like a dark ribbon. The audience erupted, louder than before. Applause thundered. A few cheers broke free. Someone shouted, "Yes." Stephen stood as the applause swelled, hands clasped together, nodding. I think that's something a lot of people needed to hear, he admitted. Julia stood too now, fully this time. The band finally played, a swelling musical cue meant to usher the moment toward closure. But the applause drowned it out. Stephen turned to her, extending his hand. Thank you for being here, he said, and this time there was no irony, no edge. Julia took his hand, firm and brief. Thank you for listening, she replied. The cameras pulled back. The red light blinked. Applause continued as the show cut to commercial. But behind the scenes, the air was electric. As soon as the cameras were off, producers rushed the stage, whispering urgently. A publicist grabbed Julia's arm, asking if she was okay. She nodded once, already moving toward the exit, her posture straight, unflinching. Stephen remained behind, rubbing his temples, exhaling slowly. A staffer leaned in, murmuring something about trending already. Stephen didn't respond. In the hallway, Julia paused briefly, leaning against the wall. For the first time all night, her shoulders dropped. Just a little. She closed her eyes, breathing in, breathing out. Whatever she'd been holding back had finally been released, and there was no taking it back now. Inside the studio, interns stared at their phones in disbelief. Clips were spreading faster than anyone could track them. Headlines were being drafted, rewritten, escalated. Julia Roberts shuts down Stephen Colbert live on air. Awkward moment turns explosive. Fans divided after tense late-night confrontation. The narrative was already forming. And like all narratives, it would simplify, distort, amplify. Julia walked out into the night, flashes popping as paparazzi shouted her name. She didn't stop. She didn't wave. She slid into the car, door closing with a final, resonant thud. Inside the studio, Stephen stood alone for a moment, staring at the empty chair across from him. The show would go on tomorrow. It always did. But tonight had left a mark. And the aftermath was only just beginning. By morning, the moment no longer belonged to the studio. It belonged to the world. Clips from the interview flooded timelines before the sun had fully risen. Grainy phone recordings from the audience sat beside pristine broadcast footage, slowed down, zoomed in, captioned with bold white text and flashing arrows. Julia's interruption. Stephen's pause. That single sentence. I chose a profession, not ownership. It looped endlessly, each replay sharpening its edge. In coffee shops, phones hovered above tables as strangers leaned in toward one another. Did you see this? Office desks buzzed with whispered commentary. Morning shows pretended neutrality while replaying the confrontation 3 times in under a minute. The anchors smiled, but their eyes betrayed fascination. This wasn't gossip. This was rupture. Social media split almost instantly, lines drawn with ruthless speed. One side hailed Julia as fearless, calling the moment overdue. Finally, someone said it. She shut it down with class. This is what boundaries look like. The other side bristled, accusing her of deflection, arrogance, ingratitude. Public life comes with responsibility. If you won't speak, step aside. The comments piled up faster than anyone could read them, outrage and praise feeding each other in a perfect algorithmic storm. Stephen Colbert woke up to a phone vibrating nonstop on his nightstand. Missed calls. Texts. Notifications stacked like dominoes. His name trended alongside hers, an uncomfortable pairing frozen in digital ink. He scrolled silently, jaw tight, watching strangers dissect his tone, his posture, the half-second hesitation that had become a meme overnight. Screenshots circled with captions like, "This is the moment he realized he lost control." At the network, emergency meetings were called. Executives spoke in careful language, context, nuance, valuable conversation, while PR teams drafted statements designed to say everything and nothing at once. Advertisers checked sentiment reports. Some worried. Others leaned in. Controversy, after all, brought eyes. Julia, meanwhile, stayed offline. She sat at her kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the wood, her phone face down beside a cooling cup of coffee. Her publicist spoke softly from across the room, outlining options. A statement, an Instagram post, a clarifying interview. Julia listened, nodding, but her gaze drifted toward the window. "I don't want to explain myself," she said finally. Not angry, just certain. There was a pause. "You don't have to," the publicist replied carefully. "But the narrative will do what it does," Julia finished. "It always has." By noon, op-eds appeared. Some praised her composure, framing the moment as a masterclass in reclaiming agency. Others warned of a chilling effect, arguing that celebrities withdrawing from public discourse weakened collective momentum. Think pieces multiplied, each one confident, each one incomplete. Fans replayed the clip obsessively, analyzing micro-expressions like scholars decoding ancient text. The way Julia leaned forward. The way Stephen swallowed before responding. Body language experts weighed in. Former late-night producers chimed up anonymously. Everyone had an angle. Everyone had certainty. But beneath the noise, something quieter spread. Messages. Private ones. Actors, especially women, reached out to Julia. Some thanked her. Some admitted they wished they'd done the same years ago. Others said nothing at all, just sent a heart emoji or a single word, needed. Stephen released a short statement that evening. It was measured, respectful. He acknowledged the intensity of the exchange, praised Julia's honesty, reaffirmed his commitment to conversation. The internet dissected it anyway, parsing sincerity from syntax. Apologies were no longer accepted at face value. They were audited. That night's show opened differently. No monologue joke about the incident. No wink to the camera. Just a brief acknowledgement and a deliberate pivot. The laughter felt thinner. The audience watched more closely now, aware that the illusion of control had cracked. Late-night television had always thrived on the idea that nothing truly unexpected could happen. That spontaneity was safe. Contained. Julia's moment shattered that comfort. It reminded everyone, hosts, guests, viewers, that live meant live. And boundaries, once crossed, could be redrawn in real time. Days passed. The trend faded as trends do. Another controversy rose to take its place. But the clip never disappeared. It settled into the internet's long memory, resurfacing whenever conversations turned to power, to expectation, to who gets to demand what from whom. Julia returned to work quietly. No grand statements. No victory lap. Just scripts, sets, the familiar hum of creation. Stephen continued his show, sharper in some ways, more cautious in others. Both carried the moment with them, an invisible scar that altered how they entered rooms. And somewhere out there, viewers replayed it again, not for the shock anymore, but for the feeling. That rare, electric sense of watching something real break through the polished surface. A reminder that even under the brightest lights, people are still people. Capable of saying no. Capable of drawing lines. That's why this moment mattered. Not because someone won. Not because someone was shut down. But because for a few unscripted minutes, the performance stopped, and the truth stepped forward. Now it's your turn. What do you think? Was Julia right to push back? Or did Stephen ask the question everyone was thinking? Did that moment redefine boundaries, or avoid responsibility? Share your opinion in the comments. Let your voice be part of the conversation. And if you want more explosive cinematic stories that pull you inside the moments everyone else only summarizes, subscribe to The Truth Narrator right now. Like this video, stay curious. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to play the role you're handed.